the significant projects update. What we're trying to demonstrate is the level of due diligence we've done in assessing external industries' capability in delivering the various options within the cycle-based program. Up to press, I guess, the risks that we've highlighted or the things that we've said that might affect the deliverability have been nothing other than anecdotal, and what we're seeking to do here is actually provide a degree of science behind that. So I'll hand over to Brad. I'd just reiterate, this is only about the external capability. Obviously, there's internal impacts in having such a scaled-up investment program, but we'll stick with the external factors. So, Brad.
Thanks, Tom. Thank you, councillors, for letting me come here today to share this. Like Tom mentioned, this was supposed to be shared at the monthly update on significant projects, but we didn't get a chance to. So it's good that we get a chance to do this now. The first slide that I've got up here is a slide on what our growth programs currently look like in the LTP consultation document. So in the transport space, the darker yellow bars on the left-hand side are what we've actually delivered in the past. So those are the numbers that we've delivered in terms of our growth programs. What's proposed in the current consultation document in the growth programs is shown on the right. So already quite a significant lift in expenditure that's been proposed through the consultation document that's out there, and it's much more than we've historically delivered over the last 3 years. This is a piece of work that's been done by a bunch of different organizations in the construction sector, where they've looked at the amount of work that's happening within construction versus the available resources that are there. What you'll see is that currently in the Wellington region, so this is a snapshot of this year in the Wellington region. Currently in the Wellington region, there's $6 billion worth of work that's going on. There's just under 20,000 available skilled workers to do that work, and the supply gap in terms of resources required is 45%. So we need another around about 10,000 people in order to deliver that $6 billion worth of work. If you look at the bottom left, which is just the Wellington City Council area that's been highlighted there, that little speech bubble shows you an even more drastic picture, which is negative 137%, meaning we are way short on physical resources to deliver the amount of work that we need to do this year. Done it there. Yeah. It's a bit small. I'd encourage you to go to this website and have a look, because they do the projection for this year, next year, the year after that, and then the following 3 years. And you'll notice that it's only when you get into that following 3 years that the picture starts to look more promising in terms of the supply gap reducing. Currently in Wellington City, there is $1.4 billion worth of work that's on the go, with another $1.8 billion that's to come in the next little while, and another $1.8 billion that is being spoken about but not really firmed up and may or may not happen. This is generally what the sector is saying, both the construction sector and the transport sector. So in this month, Infrastructure Commission New Zealand released a document on the state of infrastructure, and it basically indicated that there's a shortage of skilled workers currently available. Supply chains are being difficult in terms of us bringing materials in. This has started to affect some of our council projects already, where we're struggling to get traffic management writers to write traffic management plans. We're struggling to get steel in to finish some of our jobs, so some of our jobs are being deferred and delayed because of that. Last year, Waka Kotahi released a report, which is at the bottom end. They're just indicating the amount of work that's going on in the Wellington region. They highlighted as well that there's a shortage of skilled workers in the region, and they also highlighted some of the bigger jobs that are on the cards that are yet to come, which is the Otaki to North Levin, the Melling Interchange, the Melling Bridge, Let's Get Wellington Moving, all these big chunky transport projects that are still to come that they're not sure how it's going to get resourced and how it's going to get delivered. When you start talking about the Wellington region and the transport market currently as it stands, this is just a graph that shows you the investment by all the different councils as well as NZTA or Waka Kotahi. What you'll see is that over the next few years, Waka Kotahi dominates the CapEx environment. So they have the most significant CapEx portfolio that they're putting into the market. Ours is second in the region, but still dwarfed when compared to theirs. This is the current market. So in terms of the current market, this is how it's currently split up in terms of who dominates the market. Higgins has 14% of the market, Downer has 17% of the market, and Fulton Hogan have 70% of the market. A large portion of that, this is just transport-related market share. It doesn't include the fact that Fulton Hogan also are maintenance contractor for Wellington Water. These are the main contractors that we have available to us in the market. We've got Ventia. Ventia currently owns Council's FM contract. They do not have a transport presence yet, but there's a possibility of being able to get a transport presence in Wellington through Ventia. HEB Construction, in the transport space, they don't really have a permanent base in the region, in the transport space, but there's a possibility of us engaging with HEB and bringing in some resource into the area. Downer, who have 18% of the market, and currently they've got TG, they've got State Highway 58, and they've just won the Nauranga to Petone Cycleway. Fulton Hogan, which already has 70% of the market, maintenance contractor for Wellington Water, and have also got the Petone to Melling Cycleway. And then Higgins. Higgins has 14% of the market, but doesn't have a presence close to our council area. It's more towards the outskirts of the region that Higgins are available. We also have smaller contractors on the books. So these are the contractors that are generally used to do stuff like retaining walls, sea walls, tunnels, bridges, that type of thing. At a push, they could be geared up to potentially tackle things like cycleways, but it's not their core business, and generally they don't tender for stuff like that. They like the big chunky tunnels and stuff like that. So currently, what we're looking at in terms of growing the market, so this is the piece of work that we're starting to do and we've been working on for the last little while, is we need more contractors in the market. We need more resources. COVID's kind of put a limit on the amount of people that we're able to bring in. A large portion of our workforce is South African or from the Philippines, and currently that isn't happening. So people aren't coming in, and we just don't have workers coming into the workforce. I'm on the steering group for Waka Katai's maintenance contract. So their maintenance contract gets tendered next year, and they're looking to have an alliance-based contract. So I've sat on the steering group of that with the intention to see if we could potentially lever off that contract and get some of the benefits of leaning on something that's bigger. You saw the CapEx investment that they're putting in, so they've got pretty big clout in this space. And if we can potentially lever off them, we might be able to grow our resource capability in terms of what we can deliver. The council's procurement strategy was recently approved, and through that we're now working with the commercial partnerships team in terms of looking at more strategic partnerships, in terms of bringing people in-house and having contractors working with us. We're looking at options of panels of suppliers, so suppliers that we can engage in a long-term relationship with and have multiple suppliers in the panel that we can engage with. The maintenance contract for roading ends potentially in 2023. I have an ability to extend it by a further 2 years or to call it quits and end it there. So all this work that we're doing now will actually lead us to that point, to make a decision at that point as to what we do with that contract. The other thing is talking to the suppliers like Ventia and HEB and others that are offshore. If we can provide them with a certainty of a works program and a defined work program, it makes it easier for them to decide to invest into Wellington and actually come and set up shop here. At the moment, we don't really have a defined work program, so our first port of call is to actually define that and then engage with the market and see if we can get people to come in and set up shop in Wellington. And then I'm working with the other councils. So the other councils and I are looking at, if we combine our resources, how we can engage with the market more positively to try and encourage some of the smaller players to become bigger players so that they can take on bigger amounts of work. Really short presentation that I just wanted to give to you, but any questions, I'll take any questions now. Vito will talk to this slide a little bit later on.
Just before I take questions, can you just sort of talk us through what you see the risks by time in terms of being able to do more and the degree to which we end up potentially competing with ourselves and pushing prices up? We've done it before. We've actually knocked contractors out of particular projects.
Yeah, so
because we've already given them another one.
At the moment, I mean, if we look at who our predominant suppliers are in the transport space, it's again the Fulton Hogans and the Downers, right? They get the bulk of the work. They're currently really committed across the board. Like I've said, Downers finishing up TG, but their construction crew is pretty much going to jump off TG straight onto Naranga Petone. Fulton Hogan's got the Petone to milling cycleway, and they're probably going to be looking at the milling works that are happening at the end of it, and potentially wanting to get into that. The risk we face as a council is potentially overcommitting ourselves and taking on a larger degree of risk of actually being able to deliver some of these things because of the limitations in the market.
And do you think that that is something that potentially resolves itself? Obviously, that will need new people, either people trained here or people brought in. Length of time before that starts to change to the degree that which, I mean, we're obviously here in an internationally competitive market, particularly Australia.
Yeah, so I think a number of the initiatives that Brad's highlighted do take time to take effect. So in order to grow the industry in conjunction with our partners, there's probably a couple of year sort of moment of inertia around that. I guess the other things we can do in approaching the market is look at the commercial vehicles by which we're approaching the market, bundle up our programs of work into greater programs of work, and make them more commercially attractive. So there are some things that we can do now, and then there's some things that we'll do which will take time.
Right. Questions. I can see. I might give myself a little list. I've got so Tamitha, Iona, and then we'll go around the other. Laurie, Jenny, Rebecca, Fleur. Right. Okay. Right. Tam.
With the workforce, do they need to be skilled and trained? Because like my flatmate is worked on the one by the airport, and he's got no qualifications. He's from England, and he's been working on it for ages. Oh, no offence. yeah. Oh, he's a barber, you know, like, and so like surely it's a.
He wasn't from
industry that
Leeds.
people can just be, brought into. It's not like, what skills do you even need to work on them?
I mean, I'll let you answer that. I mean, within sort of linear construction, there'll be a number of roles which require skills, trades, and there'll be a number that don't, right?
Okay.
So generally what you'll have within a work crew, and you can have a work crew that's relatively inexperienced, but then you really need a very experienced, very skilled supervisor or supervision team that's actually monitoring what they do. So if somebody comes in, they've never worked a digger before, and you're going to put them on a digger, that's a massive safety risk that you're taking on by putting them onto that digger. So you need really strong supervision and really skilled supervision to make sure that they don't hurt themselves or others.
So if we were to do the cheap and cheerful, as it's said, but safe, cycleways everywhere, that surely doesn't need a whole bunch of skilled workers. That's just putting some cones up.
You mean the recommended option within the LTP is?
No. I mean like a, because the feedback we heard is that that option 4 is gold-plated options. So, but I think what the community would be happy with some interim, just like cheap and cheerful is what it's called. So. What's the potential of that?
The one example was given was the innovating streets up Brooklyn Hill, and people saying, what if we took that model and rolled it out across everywhere else?
Since it's about deliverability.
So the innovating streets model, yet to implement that model isn't massively difficult, but the innovating street model needs a very well-defined traffic management plan to accompany it. And that's one of the areas where we're finding a lot of shortage in terms of skill. Currently, people to write traffic management plans are in short supply for us because traffic management companies are being used by everybody. If you're doing a bit of building construction, you need a traffic management plan, so they're overcommitted as well.
Okay.
Probably worth mentioning. With traffic management, we are currently looking about whether the viability of an internal capability, because it's disproportionately expensive. So.
Yeah.
Okay, and then my other one was just that's the deliverability, but what about the planning of the cycleway? So again, like I said this morning, there's no money for planning in those first 3 years. Surely this doesn't matter if we're just planning it. Surely we can start planning now, even if we're not going to deliver in the first 3 years. Otherwise, we'll just be planning from what, years 4 to 6 and still have nothing in,
Option 3 or 4?
That's option 3.
It's option,
Yeah.
In option 3 of, so in the consultation document, there is $3 million in year 3 to reprioritise and plan the rollout of the projects.
And then option 4's got the planning in the first 3
Yeah,
years.
so it gets moved forward.
Activity.
Can there be like I'm going to do option 4 anyway, but can there be like something like an improvised option 3 that includes planning in those first 3 years? Or could that be an amendment?
Can you walk us through one? Because Tam, one of the things that we did sort of say is one of the question areas generally was what actually is delivered in terms of planning at the moment under option 3 and option 4, and what's delivered in terms of actual delivery in terms of the capital budgets across those two different options, because that wasn't entirely clear. But that's not so much these guys. So maybe come and deal with that. Yep. Okay. We'll get an answer to that one.
Look, I think the planning relates to an entire review of the network. So that 2015 cycle master plan has a staging process to it. It's got a classification and hierarchy. So the planning relates to that work. I know the Deputy Mayor's talked at length about a reprioritisation of that program. So that's the sort of planning we're talking about. Conditions change from time to time as well. So there are options to move an amendment to bring planning forward and accelerate it. It'll only help the officers get to the finishing line faster.
That will be useful. Okay, you're on.
I'm on.
Ask your question.
So I think Tam and I are on the same page, but does it take a lot of effort to plan a pop-up like Brooklyn?
Yeah, it does, Councillor. So that's what Brad's referring to from a traffic safety plan point of view.
Okay.
And just to be clear, outside of that network review, we can still do the behaviour change stuff, which is really what Innovating Streets is. It's about trying to show and test and pilot what's possible to the community.
Okay, but it still takes time to even...
And planning.
Yeah, okay. 2 questions. I'm just wondering if we're dealing with this issue at the right level. So, Andrew, you might know, our minister's dealing with this issue because it's not obviously just around Wellington. There's lots of infrastructure works that need to be done. Yeah. So what's the government doing about it?
Government is certainly very well aware of that, aren't they, Barbara?
They are well aware, but are they doing anything?
In fact, you saw, I think, in the budget, which is obviously last week's budget, there was a specific reference to risk.
Around water?
No, around ability to deliver capital programs. There was.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. But so then the next question is, this is
a national issue.
Yeah, so can we deal with it at that level as well as, obviously within a regional context as well? Otherwise we're a bit, that's not going to take us far. NZTA, so what's fuelling that work? Their tunnels and their lovely motorways.
Okay.
So what's causing the skyscraper?
So can you just remind me what?
Nauranga to Melling 57?
58.
58, yeah.
TG.
And Transmission Gully.
The Petone Cycleway.
Yeah.
Some there. Well, I could tell you, yeah, how you prioritise on that. And also, sorry, Liam, Tam just reminded me, I mean, we have intelligence from the CE of one of these construction firms that they do have capacity. So I just think it would be quite good to kind of understand exactly where they're coming from. And maybe it would be nice to for them to come in and talk with us, because we would love to give them work.
So from me, I have regular meetings with the CE, so I'm happy to, if you want to give me my name, I'll gladly have that meeting as a follow-up.
Thank you. Laurie.
Kia ora, yeah, my question is following on from Iona. Does the Let's Get Welly Moving work, is that part of that Waka Kotahi tower block as well?
No, it isn't.
No, it isn't.
No, it isn't.
And that's got a lot of cycleway commitment in there as well.
Yeah.
But that's not even included yet.
It's not factored into this.
So to be clear, those are projects which have already been decided, committed, and in many cases are under construction.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Jenny.
Thanks. I really appreciate the work that you're doing to try and work across the region and with NZTA to try and see how we can tackle this. I guess one of my questions is around, this was an issue they had in Christchurch after the earthquake rebuild, and they ended up with what was called SCIRT, the Stronger Christchurch Infrastructure Rebuild Team. Yeah. Are we taking lessons from that in terms of how we're going to tackle this problem for us in Wellington and across the Wellington region? And how does what you're proposing, how is it similar or different to what was done under the skirt model?
I'm talking about skirt.
Okay.
So the skirt model was essentially an alliance set up with multiple commercial entities, which is based on a partnership approach. Essentially, what we'll do is we'll all get together, we'll go open book, we'll work it out, and we'll design it and build it all at the same time, based on relationship, partnership, and honesty. And that did work well. Where alliances are really effective is if you've got a timeline that you need to adhere. They're often not the cheapest, but they're often really effective in terms of getting a big quantity of work out. I guess we are learning from that, and we are looking at comparable models. Certainly, Brad's involved in joined-up conversations with the other neighbouring territorial authorities to say, look, if we get to work with our work together, do we get a great commercial efficiencies there? Equally, we're going to look at our next generation of road and maintenance contracts. We're going to look at more progressive commercial models to make ourselves go further.
I think it's just worth noting that the other thing we must remember right now is the unique circumstances we are experiencing globally. So, number one, we have a low unemployment rate in New Zealand at the moment. I think from memory it's around 4%. And secondly, we do not have access to an international workforce that Christchurch and Canterbury would have had at that time. So we are dealing with a very unusual situation here. And I think what we're doing is trying to be as creative as we can within those parameters.
I think one of the other risks is I know there is a concern, and whether you can verify this or not, but I know there is a concern in construction that Australia pays considerably higher wages, and that when now borders have opened, that we may actually lose people as much as gain them.
So my question is about the downsides to the risk of not delivering. So I understand that there's a public confidence issue from, because obviously we're getting a lot of subtle guidance to funnel us into option 3, and many of us, including myself, want to vote for option 4. And because I can see the main one that I can see is the public confidence issue, but the public are telling us to do this and are aware of the circumstances in which we're operating and that risk is there. So what other risks are there for us to make a political decision to do as much as, to do the whole shebang and not doing it?
I guess the risk of we're just flagging the risk of non-delivery. I guess what the second and third order effects associated with that are, I guess I've not really done much thinking on. But what we're trying to do is just really show the risk so it informs your decision-making process. You want to talk about the NZCAs?
Yeah, there's also the risk of currently everything we do is subsidized by Waka Kotahi. And so it's not just a reputational risk that we take on with Waka Kotahi, it's that ongoing investment into our, if we can't deliver what we tell them we're going to deliver, why should they keep money aside for us?
Can I just add, there has always been a level of risk which is apparent in local government and not just for Wellington City Council, that we commit to our communities a particular level of capital expenditure and rollout of projects, and we don't achieve that. And one of the downsides of that is we are also raising rates in our community effectively for a program that we're never going to deliver, and we have to be cognizant of that. The second one is probably a more selfish one for me, is that if we do have an ambitious program, that we go into this with collective understanding that we have given a signal that we may not be able to do it in the way we would like to, and that there is acceptance between us that is a greater risk than normal, because the staff will be very aware of the expectations placed upon them to deliver something that they may not be able to. And look, I'm as keen as you to deliver as effectively as we can and deliver what our city wants. We're just pointing out we're not. I hope doesn't feel like a huge effort to persuade you away from an option you wish to choose. We respect that you will choose the option you wish to, but we just have to tell you that this is the environment within which we're doing it.
Yeah, look,
So I've got Jill, Sarah and Diane.
I'm no free marketeer, but don't markets just respond to signals? So if we choose option 4, the market will change because that's what they do. And aren't they? And isn't that the reason why we contract this out? Because they're more agile at responding to signals. And if it's not, why don't we do it internally?
So generally, the market will respond, but I think we're in particularly unique times with the quantum of work, COVID, all the other agencies ramping up their investment, the availability of qualified staff, where it will respond, but there's going to be a moment of inertia about it responding. So, I mean, there are things we can do to make ourselves a more sought after, more attractive client in terms of looking at the bundling up of work and the commercial models we're using. But ultimately, the market will respond, but it will respond at a pace that's reflected in the current operating environment.
So just 2 other questions. Doesn't this analysis make a strong case for building internal capacity with Waka Kotahi? Because it's them and us who are the big players in town, yet we're letting others take a profit out of it. Why are we doing that?
So it certainly does build a strong case for more collaboration across all the agencies and looking at a joined-up approach, which may or may not involve internal capability. Certainly in the traffic management space in some places, internal capability, I believe, is the way forward.
Yeah, but I'm talking for cycling too. I'm talking for the delivery of cycling infrastructure as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah,
I mean, we're just paying public money to private companies to make a profit to deliver public services, whether it's taxpayers or ratepayers.
Well, certainly when we're having these conversations with the other territorial authorities and the agency, all delivery models are on the table. Right?
Okay, cool. And isn't the problem also that it will be just much, I mean, this analysis doesn't take into account that if we don't do it, it will be much more expensive in the long run because actually every economic signal is none of the delivery of these types of pieces of infrastructure get cheaper over time. So we haven't, and also climate change demands that we do this as quickly as possible. So isn't the analysis missing the cost of delay and a climate change analysis and really just trying to focus in on one small problem without looking at the whole picture?
So I can confirm for you the cost increase within the construction industry is a more aggressive gradient than CPI adjustment.
Yeah. And if we delay, as in if we slow it down and do option 3, option 4, if we do decide to do option 4 in the future, it's going to be much more expensive than it would be if we decided to do it on Thursday.
Yeah, I've not done that analysis, but I would hazard a guess it's going to be more expensive, right? Yeah.
Just before going to Jill, just on that, I mean, that aggressive gradient you're referring to, I mean, that is the market responding to, as Fleur said, I mean, whether it's in housing or whether it's in any form of construction, the market is going, there's a hell of a lot of demand. We haven't got enough people, we haven't got enough resources, we're putting the price up.
Absolutely, yeah.
Jill.
A couple of things. We heard earlier that we've got 9 years to bring down our emissions in the city, and option 3 only really starts to address that from year 4. So it would be interesting to have had some sort of presentation of that sort of layered over the top, because obviously all of the reasons why not to do it have to be balanced to get at balance with the things that are compelling us to do it. But also, just really wanting to unpack Iona's comment a little bit, that I'm not sure that I completely understood, that you have heard some way that there is actually capacity within the industry to be able to do this, which is from one of the companies. So that's a pretty big deal, that there are companies saying we could do your cycleway network.
Yeah, so I've not been across that conversation, but I will gladly have a chat with Owen offline and make sure I join the dots on that. Okay.
So look, I'm interested because we've been thinking collectively, well, some of us anyway, about a faster rollout with some more lower cost solutions. Like the sort of thing that we've done at Crawford Road or Brooklyn Hill. Do you see the same risks in the short term if we were to sort of do a bit more of that kind of project while we're waiting for some of the longer term, industry capacity to build? Is there a same level of risk around that? Or do
No.
you see that?
So the risk would reduce if we were to reduce the type of cycleway delivery that we're talking about. So obviously, you don't require as many crews to put some paint on the road and some separators and that type of thing. But when you're starting to talk about massive construction and building a carbon
Drains
drive
and
drainage upgrades and that type of thing, you need a significant amount of people.
Okay. And I guess the other thing I wanted to ask about is I am concerned that you said that materials are getting hard to get. And I have noticed that there are selective shortages in certain good items out in the shops. Is that like what risk are we exposed to through kind of like steel supplies and like how real are these? Are you actually seeing them? And is there any forecasting as government over this? Because this could be a real deal breaker for a lot of things, not just our program, but a lot of programs.
So yes, it is. Everyone's aware that there's potential risk here with material supplies. So far, it's affected us with the Nayo Gorge strengthening works that we're doing, where steel was limited and we got delayed with steel. I believe PSR have had some issues with some of their pool upgrades as well in terms of getting steel in. So there are material shortages. At this moment in time, it's causing some delays in some of our projects. We don't know how it's going to turn out and how bad it's going to get.
And does that translate into financial increases as well, like cost blowouts?
Yeah, it costs more.
Certainly, we're in a situation where we're seeing in the construction industry that actually the availability of some materials is dictating what the design is.
Yeah.
People are designing based on what's available.
Yeah.
There's the argument to maybe do lower cost projects until some of this settles down.
Thanks. So when you're looking at your at the project pipeline that you've got, and this might be coming back to the original business case, because what we've actually heard, and I know there's some comments here that there was an overwhelming support for option 4 cycleways, but there wasn't. It was an orchestrated effort by 2 groups, and I'll just be quite clear, and I know it's never here, but we had a survey done, and that's what's representative of
Diane,
the city.
this particular bit is about delivery
Yeah, I know.
rather
So
than
what
about
we
consultation.
yeah. So I know it's not the debate, but I wanted to position it because everybody else is positioning it in a particular other way. Are you looking at whether it's going to deliver the outcomes that you intend? So when we talk about whether it's a new road or it's a new cycleway, is it going to deliver? How do you measure whether that's actually going to deliver the outcomes intended? Do you have a standard methodology, like intervention logic or something like that?
Business case.
Do you want some help over there? Yeah. Everybody's passing the buck. Yeah.
We need to know how we measure if the outcomes we set out to achieve are then measured. So we do better business casing, the NZTA business casing approach. So that looks at what is the problem, what are the options for addressing this, and then rates them and looks at the different ways. We also do go back and evaluate our projects, and that's through our standard project management process here at Council, the investment delivery framework, which requires us to go back and look at and evaluate our projects. Okay, thank you.
How do you factor in the cost of human life into this? Because seriously, people are dying because there isn't cycling infrastructure that's safe. So how is that factored in? Because they're the most at-risk, vulnerable road user group. So how is that factored into all of our transport planning and into the options that we'll pick? Because all I'm hearing is money, and every single week cyclists are being hit off their bike or killed by cars.
So I think that's a question for either Vida or Liam, really, and sort of comes to business cases in a way.
Thanks, Liam.
Through Mr. Chairman, so I mean, Hutt Road, Wellington Quay is a good example of that safety survey undertaken by Waka Kotahi, asking us to do something about the arrangement of the car parking there to improve safety outcomes. So usually we monitor not only the traffic we see around the city and from cycleways point of view, but also the accidents. And so this is what my point earlier before with the Deputy Mayor about it, reprioritisation, because matters have changed, we've got new data, and that's why we do need to reprioritise that 2015 master plan. It's based on safety, usability, and volume of usage as participation in cycling's increased.
Safety is a very big component, isn't it?
Thank you. We'll go and hop onto Island Bay. Thank you. Thanks very much. Well done, guys. I wasn't sure whether you were staying for this one or not.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And Vida.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Good work. Minute more formally, but I wanted to just bring council back to why we're bringing this work to you. So that stems from several resolutions. The first one relates to a strategy and policy committee meeting where we gave you an update on the Cycleways program, and you'll note recommendation 4. We were requested at that stage, and this is back in October 2020, to go away and progress some planning on the Island Bay project this financial year, after we got that advice from NZTA that they weren't going to apply the fast funding to that particular stretch. What followed also was a conversation coming out from the preparations in the long-term plan, which related to option 3. So what we've done here is just highlight that recommendation as it relates to option 3, and that's found in 17 and 18. 18 relates specifically to option 3, where the $6 million was put aside for Island Bay, and it requests Office to advise us how the Island Bay project can be included within that program, the program being option 3. So that set the scene for this work to be undertaken. We've spent approximately $40,000 on this work to date, and this is really where Tonkin Taylor come in. So again, introducing Janine and Jan, we're going to go through a series of slides on the options that we've developed over that period of time. Oops. So that's just a purpose slide, really. I've outlined that. What's important you need to know about that option 3 is that it was in that $6 million range, and that was the previously approved budget for Island Bay that we put into Island Bay. We put into option 3, and that with the options we're going to present today have the number going north of that, of course, but also settling in and around that apportion figure for that option. And this, of course, is going to inform decision making. So we're not talking necessarily about making a call today. This is about informing your decision making on Thursday. So over to you, Janine.
Yeah, hi, I'm Jan Noring, if you don't know me, from Tonkin Taylor. So I guess we've just got a quick agenda for today. We are going to quickly present on the background. I guess Tonkin Taylor were involved in through the Love the Bay consultation and the process that followed on from that, so we have been involved for a while. So we're going to talk quickly about that just to get people up to speed, and then go through some of the short-term safety improvements that we have been instructed to look at that were proposed to happen this financial year, and then look at some of the longer-term upgrades and re-look at that $14 or $12 million option that has previously been agreed to. So just a historic timeline. Sorry, I think you might have to click on there a little bit. Yeah. So I guess just taking people back, so I guess between July 2013 and February 2016 was the process when the current cycleway as it stands there at the moment was consulted on, was designed and was implemented. That then went through a number of different review processes, and this is really when we got involved, which is around that June 2016 mark. Yep, and then we went through that Love the Bay process. On the back of Love the Bay, there was a number of different outcomes that the community wanted to get out of it. So we then went forward and took 4 options forward, and then those 4 options were taken to you guys, and you decided on one option to take forward as the preferred option. I'm sure that you guys are aware, but we weren't involved in the next stage, which is that April 2020, there was a shovel-ready application made that was unsuccessful, and that was notified in June 2020. And then in February this year, you guys said that you wanted to resolve to reseal the parade this financial year, as well as look at some minor safety improvements. And I'll pass over to Janine.
So I just wanted to go over the current issues on the parade. These are really the things that we focused on when we're looking at potential short-term safety improvements and the long-term upgrades. So we gathered these issues from a number of sources. So the first that we're going to talk through is the findings from the road safety audit that was undertaken after the implementation of what's currently there. Some of the things in the audit have actually been addressed. So there's things around ghost markings in some areas, but these are the ones that are currently stand today. So the first one there is around inconsistency in road markings. This is particularly across intersections. So this is an example at Medway in the town center that there's some past ghost markings. This is actually a shared traffic lane, but then there's a remaining small section of cycle lane carrying through the intersection that it's not consistent treatment across intersections. So that's one of the main findings from the audit. Second one is around intervisibility, and that's at a number of locations at bus shelters, driveways, intersections. It's mostly around intervisibility with cyclists, both with cyclists and pedestrians, particularly at bus stops, and then cyclists and motor vehicles at driveways and intersections. Next is around parking in the buffer zone. So there's just the painted flush buffer zone that's meant to be for door space, and the parked cars are within the park space, but actually cars often park within that zone, and the doors open into the cycle lane. Next, around narrow lanes, particularly at the bend in the parade south of Medway Street, it makes it difficult for buses and large vehicles to pass each other. And then one of the last main findings from the safety audit was around the transitions for cyclists to and from the cycle lane and the shared traffic lane. So that happens at both the north end at D Street, south end at Reef Street, and then also to and from the business zone on both ends. Next, we looked at community feedback. So there's a lot in this space, but some of the main issues, and there's a lot of overlap here as well with the road safety audit. The first one's around the layout being quite inconsistent and confusing for all road users is really the feedback. Next was, again, lack of visibility, particularly around driveways and intersections. A confusing parking layout, so that's partially around people parking in the wrong spot in the buffer space and the cycle lanes, but also just not knowing necessarily how to use it. Next is around it being difficult for passengers to unload from their parked vehicles and cross the cycle lane, so just unloading into what feels like the road. And also the point around narrow traffic lanes, and in particular in the community feedback, what came up around that was cars being able to exit driveways without crossing the center line. And then at bus stops, there's a particular problem with the way that bus boxes are marked with traffic lanes with traffic islands, and then they end up blocking traffic. So some overlap between the safety audit and community concerns, some unique there. And then the last area, source area we wanted to talk to was the crash history. So this is particularly around the crash history post-construction, so from March 2016 to February of this year. So there's a graph up there of the last approximately the last 5 years. Under each year, at the left is all the total number of crashes on the parade, so between D Street and Roof Street. And then pulled out from that is particularly the crashes involving cyclists. So there have been 44 crashes total, and of those, 9 have involved cyclists. 2 have been in the town center, where there's no cycle lanes in particular. It's mixed traffic, and it's about sideswiping from vehicles. There were 3 between vehicles and cyclists at driveways, fueled by a lack of visibility of cyclists. 3 have been between motor vehicles and cyclists at intersections, again, fueled by lack of visibility. And then there's been one serious crash between a cyclist and a pedestrian in the mid-block, and that's when a pedestrian walked out from around their parked car into the cycle lane. So that was to set up a lot of the areas that we've been looking at when we're looking at safety improvements and long-term upgrades. So I'm going to take you through these two separate pieces of work. So the first is around those short-term improvements that were requested to be brought forward with the resurfacing to be done at the end of this year. So we looked at quite a few things that could potentially be done in the short term. We had some parameters around this, looking at things that remarking that could be done with the resurfacing, looking at temporary things that could be put in, like separators. Ultimately landed on the assumption that no curb changes would happen with these short-term improvements. So this list that was considered, there's actually quite a few on here that would fall off because of that. They'd be more substantial and require curb changes. So just to run through those, the first category that we looked at, if we could press to the next slide, was around separators. So we looked at 4 different types of separators, and ultimately in this space would recommend looking at low mountable separators and curb separators. So in that photo there, the curb separator is the one closest to us, the concrete separator, and you can get temporary ones to put in, and then a low mountable one across driveways. Next, we looked at parking changes. So as a start, we looked at providing 1 meter setback at driveways. So for some context on the parade right now, there's actually parking marked closer than 1 meter to driveway, which is closer than the legal limit. So we looked at that as a start, and then actually to really improve visibility at driveways with this type of arrangement, the recommendation is to provide at least a 3 meter setback, and then also to provide a 30 meter setback at intersection approaches. So we looked at all of those and ultimately would recommend that 3 meter at driveways, 30 meters at intersections, and then also not marking individual car parks. So this came from a number of things. This is in line with the previously approved option. It was specified and also came from community feedback as well. It also means that there's more flexibility in parking, because when we mark them individually, we're marking quite wide spaces in the middle, but depending on parking behaviors, you can actually fit some more spots. Also, you might see non-compliant parking and someone taking up 2, but it allows for that flexibility. Next, we looked at road markings. So this is, again, back to that inconsistency across intersections. So you see 2 intersections here where one, there's the green painting across, and one doesn't have that. So if we're resurfacing the road, there's opportunity there to clean things up and have a consistent approach all the way along the parade. Also looking at marking wider buffer space and wider traffic lanes. So right now the buffer varies between 0.6 meters and 1 meter, but the minimum for door space, for a safe door space, is 0.85. So we've recommended here 0.9. And then the traffic lanes right now are 3 meters, so we've recommended to widen those to 3.2, especially to help with when buses are passing each other. And also part of the reason why we see people parking further out too is to provide a wider traffic lane space, so it would help to address that. The next items on the list were around the bus stop improvements and raised tables were ultimately not carried forward because those would require some significant curb changes. And the next was around the removing ghost markings, which was already something that was requested in this upgrade. And then the last area is just around the business zone. So we looked at potentially adding cycle lanes, but to do that through the business zone would require very extensive curb relocation, so not appropriate for the short-term improvements. But then we looked at changing the road humps through there. So right now the road cushions that encourage cyclists to actually move out towards the parked cars, particularly the angled parking. So looking at something more bus and bike friendly through that area. And then also remarking the transitions to and from the cycle lanes. So if you click once more. So right now you can see that red arrow on the left is the path that cyclists have to take to merge into traffic, and then vehicles are coming up behind, and actually the visibility is blocked by parked cars. And then actually further up, if you click once more, that's where the cycle lane's marked again. So it's just inconsistent of when transitions happen. So again, with the remarking, opportunity to clear things up there. It's all short-term things, but can be done with the resurfacing. So that's the list of everything that I've just run through, and then from those changes, this would be the resulting cross-section changes. So the top cross-section there is the existing cross-section, fairly typical along the entire residential zone for the parade. The middle one there is the typical cross-section. So for most of the length of the parade, we actually have enough width to fit all of the elements from curb to curb. However, between the south end of the town center, so at that bend south of Medway all the way down to Trent Street, so that's just over 2 blocks worth. The curb-to-curb width is too narrow to fit to safely fit every feature that's there right now. So to include the cycle lanes, the buffers, the parking, and the traffic lanes. So to be able to have a safe outcome with these just with resurfacing, a lane of parking would have to be removed on one side. So these are the resulting recommendation for the cross-section. So in terms of implementation for these options, so there's 4 options here for implementation. The resurfacing was originally scheduled just from Mercy Street down to Reef Street. So that's option 1 there, is if you just undertook the resurfacing and just did improvements in those areas. There's some details there on what those changes would look like. The second option is just do the resurfacing in that area, but actually do the rest of the improvements along the entire length. What that would result in is you clean up the ghost markings between Mercy and Reef Street. You'd end up creating more ghost markings further north, but those would be fairly limited to things like the parking end bars. So they wouldn't be, right now there's ghost markings from like full turning lanes that have been moved, for example. Option 3 is to resurface up to Avon, because with the transitions changing, there's some pretty significant ghost markings through there. And then the last option is to resurface everything. So you get rid of all ghost markings and you put in all of the safety improvements. So there's quite a range in there of what the cost would be. We've included the base construction cost just for the resurfacing, and then all the additional costs if you add the safety improvements to these. And so around this, there's obviously significant parking impacts depending on the option that we're looking at. So for some context, there are in the residential zone of the parade, so outside of the town center, there are currently 151 marked spaces. If the legal setback were applied of the 1 meter setback at driveways, there'd be between 135 and 140 spaces. So that's the context of what's there now. And then if we look at the changes with option 1, there's multiple reasons why parking would be removed, but ultimately if you just looked at Mercy to Reef Street, you'd end up with 95 to 115 spaces approximately. And then options 2 to 4, because of that cross-section change and having to fit things between curb, it would drop to 60 to 80 spaces. So that's everything we have around the short-term safety improvements.
Just stop for questions here. Chairman?
You just want to do this one?
Well, I think we've got a couple of questions in the short term, so we'll take those. I think it's a good idea, and then we'll move to the long term.
Dozens of them, so we'll see.
Thank you very much. I'll be quick because this is a hot topic. I presume we can get copies of the presentation because lots of detail. Yeah, okay, thank you. The first question I've got, I presume you'll get to the more expensive upgrades. Okay, so that's fine. If we look at other cycleways, how does this sort of compare in terms of that sort of visibility and those sorts of issues?
In terms of visibility, like at intersections, for example?
Yeah. I mean, like, was it fundamentally flawed, in other words, the design that we originally approved on the basis of technical advice? You know, we're not road engineers. Oh.
It wasn't us who did the original one.
Anyway,
just to clarify.
Not that that matters, but, you know, so, yeah, was there some flaws, or was it actually kind of basically okay, and then it could just be, and then, sorry, my other question just was, is this going to help pedestrians as well?
So in terms of the existing layout and how it aligns with current guidance, so for example, the buffer space right now, as I mentioned, the narrowest at times is actually down to 0.6, which is quite narrow for a buffer space. It's not enough for the door space and also for people to safely exit from their vehicle. So we're looking at least a 0.9 buffer width. Also around visibility, again, that parking setback, the 3 meters and the 30 meters, there's technical notes and studies around that to provide visibility. And right now there's parking within that space, so it obstructs view of cyclists, obstructs the view of cyclists to see pedestrians and vehicles, and also vice versa. In the short-term options, there's not any for pedestrian using this walking along the parade. In the short term, there aren't any significant changes. For pedestrians exiting and entering vehicles, it would create a wider buffer zone to use and also a raised space. So it's a raised designated space that it signals, it's a difference from a flat, flush surface of the carriageway, signal as pedestrian space. So that would be an improvement for people unloading and loading into vehicles.
Just the fundamental question is, should that have been done in the original design? Well, I know it might be too late, but I think it's just important because is it a design that's fundamentally kind of okay and can be improved, or does it need to be?
So in our opinion, it does not align with the technical guidance that we are referred to as transportation engineers, the current design.
Me. I guess the parking issue is going to be an issue, but I wonder if we're making it sound a little bit worse than it is by just focusing on the loss in one section, versus sort of the loss, the balance over a broader area. But my real question is actually, in that bit that you're suggesting taking it out, on that side, do most people have off-street parking?
So the numbers that we've presented, if we want to pull those back up, but that's for the entire length of the parade, but not the side roads coming from the parade at all.
So are we comparing apples with apples there? So can just interpret it for me. So over the entire length of the parade, where the cycleway currently is, right up to sort of D Street, I think it is. So the legal spaces would be 135 to 140. Yes. And are you saying
not including the town centre though?
Oh, okay, not including the town centre. And then what we're doing is we would be down to 60 to 80 in options 2 to 4, or 95 to 130, 115.
Yes.
Okay. The section that you highlighted that might have one whole side removed, I think it's the west section between, is it the western side of?
So the cross section on there is indicative of which side that would.
Yeah, I think it was the western
options
side. But
for both sides. It's pretty balanced on both sides.
Would it be fair enough to say that there's off-street parking for most of those?
The majority of residences on the parade have off-street parking. Yes.
Okay.
Jill.
Very quick question: has there been any studies done on the parking utilisation along the parade and what the impact will be? Because we heard with the Thornton Quay one that actually it's like there's quite a lot of empty spaces a lot of the time. What do we know about this one?
There haven't been any recently. The last ones, I believe, was 2016 that they were from. And those were used in the earlier design work. But how that compares today, there haven't been any updates.
Could be worth doing, because when I was there the other day, there was a lot of empty car parking. So people might be more alarmed than in some places than the reality might be.
Thank you. Can you just, when you talk about short-term safety improvements, and it might have to go back to the slide, what years are you talking that for?
So this was identifying things that could be integrated with the resurfacing works, pulled it forward to the end of this year, this calendar year. Again, under the assumption that no major changes were being done. That was all incorporated under the long-term upgrades, which is the second set that we'll go through in terms of the timing for that. I believe it was a 4-year plan for the long-term upgrades. So this would be something done by the end of this year, and then 3 years from now for the long-term to be implemented. So this would be an interim.
Okay, so this is an interim to be done this calendar year, or this financial year?
Calendar year.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I've just got a few questions. You talked about community feedback, but I'm a city councillor and I live in Island Bay, and I didn't know that we were seeking community feedback on this cycleway. So how did that happen, and what was that?
That was the Love the Bay community engagement.
Oh, so that's the previous community feedback.
Correct.
There's been nothing new. Okay, that makes more sense. And how did parking that was unlawful get put in the first place? Did the law change, or did the original council cycleway just breach the law? And what is this law? What can you point me to it?
So it's in the road land transport code. I'll look that up.
Yeah, not right now. It's fine. Just at some stage. Yeah.
But it's a 1 meter setback that hasn't changed. So the parking end bars right now, some of them are marked within a meter. So if you pull those back and follow the standard spacing that we use for marked parking, so a 5 meter end space and then 6 meters in the center spaces, it doesn't allow enough width to fit all those spaces. But it might be that you're only half a meter shy of getting those spaces, but they wouldn't be marked.
But my question is, did we just put in an unlawful cycleway and we didn't know?
Okay. Well,
I could just say, in terms of traffic resolutions, it's relatively common when we go back and look at traffic resolutions for changing broken yellow lines to find that we haven't been complying with.
that's why there's always a job for lawyers. Okay. And you said that you didn't want to change the curb. Was that an instruction from council in terms of your brief? Move the curb?
We had a few workshops working through this, and that was something that we raised as one of our assumptions that was confirmed with the council team, that what was being done with the resurfacing was minor temporary works that could be implemented in the interim until the long-term upgrades, yes.
Okay, so it was a budget thing from council, I guess, is my question. Is that right? Because the decision on the books is to have parking back on the curb.
Yeah, it was more a timing issue. So we need to go in and do the resealing, and this was to do the minor safety improvements which need to be done at the same time as the resealing. So the long-term options, which Janine will go through in a minute, is more those long-term options.
Okay, and the resealing, like, why would you only reseal part of it? Isn't the resealing due for all of it?
I don't know. It's Brad here, but it's only due for that part of the road is what.
Oh, I see. So I see. Okay. And my final one is around the parking. Can you just go back to that? What is it? Like, just help me make sure that I can understand, I can explain it. What is just in plain English, what is the cross-section change that results in the removal of 10 to 15 parks?
So the current curb-to-curb width is not wide enough to accommodate.
Sorry, when you say curb-to-curb, I don't know what that means.
Between the curb on the western side of the road and the curb on
right. Yes. The curbs across.
Yes.
I see, yep.
So that width currently in that stretch from Mercy Street to Trent Street is not wide enough to accommodate cycle lanes, buffers, parking, and traffic vehicles on both sides consistently within the recommended safe widths.
And so when you say recommended safe width, is that a law as well, or is that just this is what you should try and do?
Guidance.
Yeah, okay. Cool, thanks.
Kia ora, thank you. Good to see you again. Does the short-term safety improvements provide for any improvement in the business district?
The business area is quite minimal, so there's two main recommendations in that area, one around the transitions and making that clearer and more consistent, both the north and south end, particularly the south, though, around Medway Street. The markings are quite confusing. And then also looking at some road cushion changes to try to encourage cyclists to take the lane rather than move to particularly for northbound cyclists with that angled parking. But within the restrictions of keeping the curbs where they are and not having significant physical changes, it's a shared traffic lane through there. There's not much change in that space that can be done.
Okay, and so parking will stay as it is around the business district for the short term?
Yes, there won't be any changes.
Great, thank you.
I've just gone down and asked our local experts on any questions that they might have. There's just a couple around the intersections. Would they be straightened as in this plan, or would the cyclists still be kind of squeezed into the same space as the cars?
At the intersections, there would still be marked. So currently, there are marked cycle lanes through the intersections. It's not a straight alignment, but they are marked.
They're quite squeezed though, because the curb comes out a little bit and it pushes them in.
So those curbs wouldn't change. There's some areas where it's just paint marked. There'd be opportunity to straighten those ones up, but not anything significant change to the intersections. And then, yeah, it sounds like that's about intersections. Not true.
Yeah. The other question was just around where some of the potential concern might come from, particularly like the cinema or the medical centre. Has anyone been talking to them? Because it would be really good to sort of find out where the commonality is, and maybe also the community might be able to help with that conversation. You've been talking to them, yeah. But I just wonder, we need to do that as a council.
They're going to be pretty upset.
Yeah, absolutely. That's correct. So we did have a communication plan backing this up and the rollout of these options.
But we also possibly have some community
people. We still do, right? We still have that.
Yes.
Yeah.
But we also have some of the cycling advocate community who might also be keen to help with that process of talking that through. So they've, said there's some support from from there as well, which is probably quite good to take up. Anyway, I want to hear about the 14 million option.
I've got one question. Just with this being a temporary thing, so the costs I understand that are in the slide are in addition to resealing costs. Yes. What of that would be wasted in terms of a more, if you like, a permanent solution?
Let's run through the permanent solutions because some of them can be combined and some will
okay.
be wasted.
Good. Thank you. That's absolutely fine.
Next level. Next level.
Just around the costs at the end of that slide do incorporate the resealing. So the resealing on its own is around 120,000. Sorry. The resealing on its own is that black box, the 120, just for what's the scheduled resealing from Mercy to Reef Street. So we've got two sections of cost down there, the cost for just the additions on top of the reseal, and then the total cost at the bottom, just to clarify that. Yeah. Just the base construction cost for that.
Cool, thank you.
So now to the long term. Just to run through what we've done to get to where we are today, we took a three-staged approach of looking at options. So this was based on the past work that had been done. There was, as Jan ran through earlier, that there were 4 options that had gone to community for feedback. Ultimately, there was an option that was approved by councillors. That option we've taken as a base. There's a lot of technical work backing that up, as well as why that's a safe outcome. So we've taken that as a base approach, in that we're not going back to the drawing board with options and looking at everything from shared path to a cycle lane on one side of the road. It's all assuming a very similar cross section, in that there are cycle lanes on the outside of parked cars, as per guidance appropriate to the road environment. So using that as a base, we've taken that first step. We've developed options to consider in a long list, and we've actually looked at 2 separate long lists. So we looked at options in the residential zone and options for the business zone, because they are quite unique areas. We took those long lists through the second step of looking at an MCA process, or a multi-criteria analysis. And to do that, we did 3 sets of assessment. So the first was assessing objectives, and those objectives included 2 sets. One was the Wellington City Council cycling investment objectives, and the second set was the Love the Bay objectives. Second assessment that we did was looking at effects criteria. So that includes things like transport effects, looking at pedestrian, cyclist, motor vehicle, et cetera, outcomes, and also looking at things like property effects and typically environmental, although not applicable here. And then the third is looking at implementation criteria. So that's things like delivery impacts, construction timelines, and then ultimately costs as well. So from that outcome, we came up with 2 shortlists, looking at shortlists in the residential and business, and then how those might pair together well. So we've identified pairings and ultimately came up with combinations. So we have 6 that we've gotten down to that we will run through. And then those option pairings, we took all that MCA data that sat behind it, looked at a benefits assessment, looked at cost, pulled all that together for these 6 options. So here we have just the short list of what came out of the long list for the residential zone. We had 6 options and ultimately got down to consideration of 4. So this is option 1, 2, 3, and 6 that came out of the long list. 1 and 2 have the same cross section. The cross section would keep what is proposed for the short-term improvements. So if you implemented that at the end of this year, kept the short-term improvements, didn't change anything between the curbs and the mid-block. So that's those 2, the typical cross-section and the cross-section between the town centre and Trent Street, because that it changes as you vary along the parade as the curb widths change. The difference between option 1 and 2 is 1 would just retain the short-term safety improvements, and that's it. Option 2 would actually go a step further and do curb changes at intersections and bus stops. So that would be things like actually straightening up the intersections, for example, that was asked about, looking at changes to the bus stop arrangements with traffic islands, improving intervisibility around there. So you could target those. Those are the particular, referring back to the issues with the current layout. Those were common between community feedback and the road safety audit. So that's option 2. Option 3 would be replacing the short-term safety improvements and moving the curbs to achieve the preferred carriageway and cycle lane widths, and also gaining back parking. in that section between Mercy and Trent Street, and then also doing the intersection and bus stop improvements. Option 6 is replacing the short-term safety improvements with the previous councillor-approved option. That option's been value engineered, so we had, without going to the technical background of it, we had 2 options that were ultimately priced back in 2018, and then we've looked at that and done some value engineering workshops around actually where those costs coming from, what's the best value engineered option moving forward, but fundamentally the cross-section doesn't change, so there's a bit of a cost reduction there. Next, in the business zone, we had 3 shortlisted options, so that's option A, D, and I. Option A would be retaining the short-term safety improvements, so not changing the curbs, really minor things, as I mentioned before, around remarking the transitions and changing the traffic calming with the speed cushions. Option D would be replacing that with cycle lanes at road level through the entire town center and having parallel parking on both sides of the street. And then option I would be replacing the short-term improvements with, again, with the councillor-approved option, also valued engineered, and looking at parallel parking on both sides. So those are the 2 short lists, and ultimately how that's come together is creating this list of 6 combinations. So we'll run through the details for the 6 combinations of how those pair together. Maybe give a, I quickly run through those. So combination 1A is looking at in both areas, don't do any changes beyond the short-term safety improvements. Combination in 1D is leave the residential zone with just the short-term improvements and just look at the town center for further improvements of adding cycle lanes. 2A is really the inverse, leave the town center as it is with the short-term improvements, but actually go do the intersection and bus stop upgrades through the residential zone. 2D is doing bus stops, intersections, and the town center. So it's all quite, you can see additive here. 3D is cycle lanes through the town center, go back to the residential area, widen it where necessary. And then 6I is really that option in line with the council approved option. So before I'm going into the details of these 6, I just want to highlight what intersection and bus stop improvements might mean and what was improved. What was being recommended through the previous option was looking at raised tables across all side roads and actually pairing those with the zebra crossing as well, so we get pedestrian benefits too. It improves visibility because it raises cyclists at intersections, it slows down vehicles at intersections, which are typically the least safe area for all road users. And then we also potentially there could look at textured surfacing. If you click once more. Yep. Some other options across intersections. So just helping with that visibility of vulnerable users at road crossings. So this is, there's a lot of information sitting behind this, lots of data, so happy to answer particular questions, but ultimately this is the output from our MCA process. So looking at objectives, effects, and implementation, we have scores of -3 to +3. So green being in the positives, red in the negatives, the blues are neutral. And we score against all of these criteria and ultimately come up with a short list from that. And this is the combined ratings for each of the combinations. So I wanted to highlight some key takeaways from this because it is a lot of information. But as you can see, they're highlighted in yellow is that Combo 3D and 6I are the only 2 that actually score positively against all of the WCC investment objectives. Combo 2D is close, but not all positive. Next, if we look at the Love the Bay objectives, 2D, 3D, and 6I, those last 3 all score positively against all of the Love the Bay objectives. In terms of pedestrian effects, 2D and 3D actually have the best outcomes for pedestrian effects. Cycling effects, 6I, which is that councillor-approved option, has the best outcomes. And then for PT effects, it's across 2D, 3D, and 6I, it's all very similar outcomes for public transport. And then last for motor vehicle effects is Combo 6I. And then for parking, which we'll run through the details around that, but the combination 3D and 6I minimize parking loss. So from that, you can see it's really weighted towards the right, that as we move up the scale, I guess, we see better outcomes across the board. So the next slide is where a lot of the detail sits. So again, lots of information, but I want to pull out some specifics, but there's more in there if you want to ask about anything in particular. But really what's highlighted in green are where we see the benefits for each of these options. So you can see it's additive, that on the far left end, we're not changing anything from the short-term improvements. As we move to the right, we see different additions and what that means for outcomes. The next, if we click again, yep. That's highlighted where we're seeing positive outcomes for the Love the Bay objectives in particular. So very few as we're on the left side of the table, but the three options on the right score very well, and for these reasons against the Love the Bay objectives. In terms of widths, particularly we want to look at footpath widths through the business zone, and that combination 6I on the right does the best. It gives us actually additional pedestrian space for placemaking and amenity improvements through the town centre. 3D and 2D are similar in widths as well. And then for cycle facility widths, this is probably one of the main standouts, especially for looking at a road level cycle lane between two curbs. A 2 meter width is the recommended guidance for minimum widths. So this is the only option that achieves that width. Next, if we're looking at car parks, so options 1A all the way through to 2D, the first four, are all in line with the short-term safety improvements. There wouldn't be any changes to parking from that, ultimately, because there's no opportunity to widen the curbs down at that south end. But if you did widen the curbs, as is done in 3D and 6I, you could actually gain back that parking that's lost on one side of the road. So you'd end up with, in the residential zone, about 85 to 100 spots. And then that's the same as 6I, so it would be 85 to 100, yes. So it's a lot of information there. Like I said, happy to answer questions. There's lots sitting behind it as well. Cost is, I guess, the last. Do you want to go over that, actually?
No.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, we can go through costs.
Okay. Maybe give people a minute to read.
No, the costs are at the very bottom end of it.
So the bottom three rows have a base cost, and then we've pulled out the uncertainty allowance to show that there's quite a big range that's been added there for uncertainty, and then the total cost of those added together. The base costs include first, assume that the short-term and safety improvements have already been done. So when we look at combo 1A, for example, it says $0. That's because as a long-term option, it wouldn't be any additional cost. So this is the additional cost of that short-term work. So all those base costs include construction, design fees, MSQA, and a 20% addition for council management costs as well. So we end up with quite big ranges. There is a fairly high level of uncertainty at this stage. We haven't done design for these options beyond concept cross sections. It's all based on the past design work that was done for one of the options. So there is quite a lot of uncertainty and unknowns right now.
I think just to reiterate, we are currently in the process of getting an independent estimator just to double check the rates that we've used in this, but the costing that we have done is based on the 2017 Bond CM, who are an independent cost estimator, using their rates and escalating them to today's rates.
That's the last bit?
Yes, so any questions?
Okay. Right, there's a fair bit for people to digest in there, I think. Questions, and we'll try and make them quick because I'm conscious of the time. I've got Diane, Jenny, Laurie, Fleur, Sean, and Uncle Tongo, everybody else. Right, okay, Diane.
Okay, just you've got three columns for up to 6.1 million. Yet the bottom of the third column, you go from 5 to 9.1 million total cost.
Because we have such a wide range of uncertainty right now for that cost range, we have used the low end, but there is quite a big level of uncertainty. It's just the cost ranges can span quite a lot.
And is anything does this enable any NZTA funding? No. So this is all funded by ratepayers. Yeah.
And we must have a solution for Newtown to be able to agreed plan. Yep. Okay, Laurie.
Does this, what kind of town centre upgrade are we talking about for the business community? Like, because that was one of the big conversations for them. So what are we suggesting around the town centre upgrade?
So the cost here, it does depend on the option. So the options towards the left that actually, option 1A and 2A, for example, don't include any further changes in the town centre. So it would be essentially nothing for the town centre in particular. The other options from this costing perspective include there would need to be essentially a full rebuild to get cycle lanes through the town centre. So it could include significant changes, but in terms, might pass back to Vita on this, in terms of additions to that for the town centre, there's opportunity to incorporate that?
Yeah, so we haven't currently got any budget for town centre upgrades. But there will be the paving, the pavement will be redone through this work as we put cycle lanes through, but additional money for planting or other amenity would need to be added in.
Thanks. I'm just looking at these, and I think the major difference between 2D and 3D is, as an extra dimension, is that we are able to move more of the curb, which retains more residential car park. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. So we can basically save maybe 20 to 25 residential car parks for an extra $1.5 to $1.9 million. And then Combo 3D to Combo 6I, the main difference there seems to be that the cycle paths are at the level of the footpath. Is that correct?
That's right. So that has an effect on visibility for both intersections and driveways. For intersections, that can be mitigated through if raised tables, for example, were used across intersections. But at driveways, it would have to be 6I to get that raised path, yes.
Cool, thank you.
Thank you. Sean. I'm just going down the line.
Better chance, my question.
Sorry, done. Flew then.
Just the question I had on the last section that I didn't get a chance to ask is that you said that most of the dwellings on the parade have an off-street park. Has this been analysed? Because there's a lot of infill housing. Is it actually like, if it's true, it's true, but is it properly been tested?
Yes.
I don't think we've done any proper testing, but it does. Yeah, it does indicatively look like that most houses have it. There is definitely some that don't, though.
Okay. And I was just a bit surprised to hear that there's not money for a town centre upgrade because for quite some time, Island Bay has been told that there's $1 million for a town centre upgrade associated with the cycleway. So I don't think that's correct. Can we get that clarified in time for the LTP deliberations?
Yep, we can clarify that by Thursday.
Because I keep hearing that and I keep saying this and then it keeps going away. But it was definitely, Sarah promised it to the community. I've promised it to the community. It's been reinforced many times. Well, no, we both did. We were there together. The other thing that, just the other problem that I have is that this is very, very complicated. And on Thursday, I need to decide what I'm going to support. And I guess just a bit of a plea for a plain English explanation of all the options, not a kind of this is what officers want, but actually here's what you could do with this amount and this quickly. And here's what option 3 would mean, but here's what option 4 would mean, and here's what option 4 would mean if it was done sooner. So if you did the short term and the long term as quick as possible. I want to understand, and I know you don't support it, but I want to understand what that looks like. And Andy, are you wanting to talk or? Okay, cool. I'm wanting to understand what that looks like as in a plain English description so that I can express it to the community. And this is like, I get, you're technical experts and that's great, but I don't know how to translate that. So do you understand what I need? I need option 3 explained, I need option 4 explained, and I want to know what we can do with option 4 if we do the minor safety improvements and the resealing in parallel with what's currently called a long-term upgrade.
Mm-hmm. We understand, yep.
Yeah, so where the money would go, how much that would be, what years,
English,
all that sort of thing.
With the comms plan. Yep.
And I know you don't like it, but I just want to.
We're going to do that anyway.
You're cool. 'Cause I don't think I can unpack this. I'm not smart enough. I can't hold it all in my head. No, I'm not. No, I'm fine with that.
Nice, I think.
Sarah.
So my question's just around the bit where you lift the footpaths, the approved, what's currently the approved scheme. Are there any downsides for pedestrians with having the pedestrians and the cyclists on the same level compared to some of the other schemes we're looking at where the cyclists are still maintained at a lower level?
There's pros and cons to each. So in the design that had been progressed for that previously approved option, there was a small curb difference between the cycle path and the footpath. So it was a physical distinction, but it was a mountable curb. So it meant that cyclists could ultimately quite easily use that footpath space. And it also can mean that the spaces, even though there is a curb separating them, it can become a bit of a easy to cross into each other's space, but the curb helps to mitigate that. Whereas if you have a full height curb, it's completely separated, and so it's much easier to distinguish those two spaces. However, on the other end of things, particularly for pedestrians crossing the street or crossing from parked cars over to the footpath, if you don't have it raised to footpath level, it means you have an additional drop back up. That can be mitigated around things like bus stops and intersections to raise the cycle lane just in those isolated locations. But for example, from parked cars, it means that you're unloading onto a raised curb, dropping back down, coming back up, and that's, unless you're at a driveway or something, it creates more level change. So there's pros and cons to each of them.
So there's quite a bit of complexity. All right, I can see why Fleur wants a plain English summary. All right.
That's probably one of the reasons you wanted to get everything sort of all nicely in order in advance.
We need to vote in 2 days. So
no, we don't need to vote on an option. What we do need to vote on is we need to vote on
which is critical. It's material to this.
We need to vote on an envelope, and the envelope is going to be so large that this is probably going to be neither here nor there in terms of the scale of it. Four questions.
You're supporting option 4 now.
Four questions for me. The first one of them is in this one, you've got integration with Let's Get Wellington Moving. Can you unpack that, please?
Yes, that's around particularly the uncertainty, the MRT route for Let's Get Wellington Moving.
I get that.
And so if that were to move ahead through Island Bay, then there's a potential here that, say, you went ahead with Combo 6I as an example, put that in, implemented it, and then a few years later, changes came through from Let's Get Wellington Moving. There's just uncertainty around it right now.
So, okay, well, let's say there's a mass transit route that goes down that road. What does it do? Do you have no idea at all what it could do?
I guess
I suspect it's too difficult. Yeah, too difficult to know. Okay.
It changes everything.
Changes everything. Okay, that's good enough for me. Second question is just picking up Jenny's question, which was the sort of $1.5 million for 20 odd car parks. That's $75,000 a piece, which is getting up there. It's getting up there in an urban area, let alone a suburban area. So my question is, if we set this standard that we're willing to pay $75,000 a car park in a suburban area for a cycleway, what's the standard which we're going to accept in an urban area or a central city area for the cost of removing a car park? Or the cost of keeping a car park?
Is that really a fair question to engineers who are giving us technical advice?
Okay, I will put that question to our management team. I'm looking for some consistency here. What we're willing to pay.
I think that
that's why we have elections.
Yeah. There's a whole lot of different
question.
There's a whole lot of different factors. We can't answer that.
We can't answer that.
Fitness, health.
Yeah, but this was purely about the car park. But
so two key differences, just to clarify on that, between
an expensive peace offering. I'm just worried about how many other peace offerings we might have to make in other places, which could get very pricey.
Just to clarify on that difference between 2D and 3D, one of the major differences is that in the car parking numbers, there is also the element of the cycle lane width at particular locations where you can't widen, the width would be constrained to 1.5, which is within guidance. It's an acceptable closer towards the minimum standard, but it is an acceptable standard. But 2 would be the ideal. So there's additional benefits, but that is the main one.
Sure. And just two other things. That you looked at the issues around potential for flooding in any of these options? Did they change in any ways? When we're moving curbs, not moving curbs, all those sort of things.
Not at this stage. I mean, with the option 6I is similar to the option that was preferred previously, and so we were looking at flooding issues in that space, and that's what really drove up the cost of that option in the first place.
Right, okay.
But Island Bay Parade is extremely flat, so it's probably going to flood, in a big flood.
Okay, and look, my final question is just in terms of the engagement process, whatever option we put, or options we put in front of the community, what is the process which we are contemplating for engaging with the community? Because I'd imagine they probably want to have a look at quite a number regardless of what we're thinking.
We haven't designed that yet.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. For the short-term options, because we're going to implement it, it will be a traffic resolution coming back in August.
So the last thing before I go to Iona, so in terms of the short-term interim ones, with the ones that are here, which ones of those sort of still use the short-term changes, and which ones of them the short-term changes are kind of in a sense taken out? And
so if you switch to the next, to that slide there. So if across the top where it says retain, across the first 4, retain short-term safety improvements means that for the most part what's been implemented will still be applicable.
Oh, so those first 4 effectively don't
waste it. Don't waste what you're doing.
There would just be isolated changes in addition to that, where at bus stops, for example, the resurfacing would have to be redone.
Iona, just to finish off, and then I'll say thank you and good work. Oh, no, one more, sorry, Laurie.
Yeah, and I very much appreciate all the people in the gallery. So Liam and Vita, so just given this is a bit divisive about how much we spend on it, just to get your reassurance that if we support option 4 on Thursday, there will be enough money from $5 million to 17 million. So just to be absolutely clear, so we don't even need to drag it out as a separate amendment, just in the interests of just trying to get some stuff through.
So currently in option 4, we have up to 14 million for Island Bay in that option. But
do we have to specify that what it's going to cost?
We haven't put it into years because we've said in year 1 we need to go in and reprioritise and reprogram.
But do we actually have to specify how much it's going to cost? This is kind of just information and we need some more discussion and some advice.
Yeah, I mean, you view this as guidance, but you've consulted on numbers though, haven't you? You've just consulted on the funding envelope.
The problem with that, though, is that there was a decision made to actually specifically put the Island Bay money, name the money in the options. So, yeah, I think that actually is an issue that we need to deal with before we agree.
Generally, in the first 3 years of the LTP, you should have a greater level of detail and surety around costs of the specific projects that you want to do. Given you have done all of this work here, the audit of this will be fine. You've got enough work here to say you can point to a level of detail. Yeah.
Can I just ask another phasing question? So, if we just wanted to do something in year 1 or even year 2, we could do some of the work and then we could do some more a bit later. It is theoretically possible. So just, again, trying to get to a good solution for everyone. Thanks.
This might be more for our team and even for Sean. Just have we done a stock take of what's under the pavement? So particularly if we're looking at 6.1, do we have an idea of the assets that are under there and how often it might likely be ripped up and put back and all of that kind of hoo-ha?
Yes.
That council often.
Yeah, so previously we did a full survey of the whole entire parade, and we took invert levels of all stormwater assets along there. We did surveyed all of the overhead lines where the poles come in, the lights, all that sort of carry on. So yes, we do have an understanding of what is there. However, we never did any potholing. So there was a risk that some of the old tram tracks were down the middle of the Island Bay Parade. And so there was some concern about how we were going to remove them should we have to touch the middle of the parade.
Are they heritage?
It's Back to the Future.
You done, Laurie? No, so sorry. Okay, all right.
Sorry, I just missed there was an out. No, I love it, but yeah. What was your last sentence, please?
So there are tram tracks likely to be underneath, or possibly underneath the middle of the parade, but we haven't done any investigation of that physically. So we've only done surveyed where pipes are underneath the ground.
Okay.
In terms of how often they're replaced, that is council's and Wellington Water's issue.
Yeah. Okay.
Can I just...
Sarah.
Sean asked whether what Island Bay provision was made in option 3 for the long-term plan. 6 million for an Island Bay option was included in option 3, 14 in option 4. And Island Bay Town Centre upgrade not included in previous LTP or on either of the 2 annual plans. So the $1 million I cannot see in a budget.
If you can squeeze $1 million out of 6 or 14, you're going well. Last question.
Can I just ask, how much have we spent on the Island Bay Cycleway to date, roughly?
A lot less than this.
No, how much, roughly? 3 million? 4 million? How much have we spent so far?
It was two and a bit, but God only knows how much the time's been cost.
Diana.
We can't answer that.
You can't, it just hasn't been added up?
No.
We can look into.
If you included the human time, Diane, probably truckloads. We're probably in order. If makes it, yeah. Thank you. Look, thank you everyone. Thank you very much for the presentations. Thank you for your patience. Oh,
thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Oh, okay. We've got one question. Okay, councillors, can you just stay for one moment? Okay, folks, it's the end of meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Awesome.